We got to get past a zero-sum game where the only way I can win is by you losing. I like to think about how indigenous communities have been doing this forever and thinking of 7 generations into the future. This isn't novel. This way of thinking for generations just has been around, and there's opportunities for us to embrace their leadership and guidance and wisdom in this regard and apply it to these new systems.
I'm Carolyn Parrs, communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a clean energy future without leaving anyone behind. Join me as we explore the technologies, policies, and human stories that could make clean energy not just sustainable for our planet, but accessible for everyone. What if I told you that while we're racing to expand AI and data centers that use as much energy as entire metro cities, that is true, that nearly half of Americans at the same time are struggling to pay their energy bill? Now, what if I told you that the solution isn't choosing between innovation and energy equity, but actually it's about making both work simultaneously, even both profitable? How about that? Welcome to Just Power. Today, I'm talking with Dana Clare Redden, one of the most innovative thinkers in clean energy today and founder of Solar Stewards, a social enterprise connecting corporate social responsibility initiatives with historically excluded communities. She understands that real change happens when you make energy equity an economic, community-centric opportunity, not a business liability. So let's dive in. Welcome, 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 Dana.
Thank you, Carolyn. What a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that thoughtful intro.
Oh yeah, all power to you. I'm so impressed with what you're up to. But I'm going to take you way back to a small rustic belle town in western Pennsylvania where you grew up and saw firsthand, right, that fossil fuels shaped your community and your values. So can you paint us a picture of what you witnessed back then, and how did those early experiences become a driving force for you founding Social Stewards?
Yes, well, thank you very much. And it really always comes down to, what shaped us in those formative years when we talk about, you know, being able to really sink into a career, sink our teeth into a career that is rewarding for us, right? So,
So yeah,
many people know Pennsylvania right now as, the shale gas fracking. Sadly,
true.
that's the latest chapter in environmental exploitation and degradation. But kind of dating myself a little bit, I grew up in, the remnants of coal. So these were abandoned coal mines. It was acid mine drainage
Mhm.
where the rivers run orange and they smell like rotten eggs. Mountaintop removal, where, the laziest way to find a coal seam just to rip the top of a mountain off, changing the entire landscape and horizon. Pretty cruel treatment of the environment. So I'm from an environmental justice community, and that really shaped the work that we do now, and particularly what it looks like when communities are left out of the benefit, and the health implications that they're then left to face alone. And so the economic inclusion is also a cornerstone of what we do at Solar Stewards.
Yeah, you've taken your pain from your past and look what you did. Look what you're doing. And we're going to learn more about that. But that is so empowering. And I hope if you're listening and you have a story inside of you that wants to emerge in a way that's actually healing for people on the planet, listen up, because you're going to hear a lot about that, how Dana did that. And frankly, a lot of us that are in the energy movement and environmental movements have some of those stories, right? So that is so cool that you did that, Dana. So let's just give us a snapshot of what is Solar Stewards, right? What do you do, and what is your mission?
Is pretty straightforward in the fact that we want to foster economic development and reduce barriers to renewable energy adoption, primarily for historically excluded communities. And what I mean like that by that is those communities and groups that just are the most vulnerable to climate change.
Hmm.
So, we're talking about those obviously in frontline communities that are facing that environmental degradation from fossil fuels, but we're also talking about elderly folks that may be more sensitive to the, heat index and the heat island, youth and children and how vulnerable they are to the effects of climate. So historically excluded communities is a kind of a catch-all for a lot of areas of focus. But
Sure.
it does acknowledge that climate change affects different communities differently, and the most vulnerable have the most to lose right now. And so Solar Stewards is really here to leverage some things that are already working. This is it's as you mentioned, there's a lot of pain in this work, a lot of trauma informed, solutions that we can really uh, reference and dive into. And part of that is the mechanism of renewable energy credits and renewable energy markets. you know Different states have renewable portfolio standards. Some do, some don't, but anywhere you can take a renewable energy credit, get it registered, or a megawatt hour of renewable energy, get it registered to become a renewable energy credit. And that's how, when we hear about a corporate saying I'm 100% renewable, that's how they're meeting those goals. They're buying renewable energy credits.
Right.
So we allow them to buy these renewable energy credits from local impactful projects, small
Nice.
projects, which you might imagine isn't really how they're traditionally buying these because they need so many. They typically want bigger projects, and maybe they don't necessarily care about the exact town that's from or the school. But we really get into that aggregation and localization of these opportunities.
Yeah, well, they really should care about that because that is a story that they can tell, right? And I'll tell you,
Absolutely.
a lot of the corporations, especially our utilities, I encourage them to tell those local stories because it gives it the human side to energy. It's not just all about like our ratepayers paying bills, but it's actually the people behind it. So I love that. And if you're an energy provider, hopefully you're listening to this, why don't you give them a call and really let's get your portfolio diversified. And this is a way to help bring energy equity and sustainability into your portfolio. It could be a utility. Well, actually, we're talking a corporation that needs to do that, right? So let's get into those, what you call social recs, right? Your program. And that connects corporations, right? And their renewable energy procurement with underserved communities. So how does that work? And can you share, let's say, a specific example of how it may have created some real measurable impact?
Too. Yes, so we're leveraging these renewable energy credits we have in our Solar Stewards marketplace, the opportunity for our community partners that include municipalities, community-based organizations. They can join our marketplace. They upload their projects. So we get to see the details, obviously, of the solar project itself, but also the community and some of their incentives that sometimes don't have anything to do with solar. Maybe it's, general job training or, STEAM
Hmm.
and STEM stuff for school districts. But they upload their details of their project, and this is how we can organize and vet these projects to make sure that When we pass, and this is one of the most exciting things about social recs pass 100% of the proceeds of the sale of that renewable energy credit to our community partners. So I
Nice.
mentioned Solar Stewards, our cornerstone is economic inclusion. And it's critical if you're going to make an impact claim that who you claim to benefit is benefiting. And what better number than 100% can we,
Yes.
it's a nice round number. So all of those funds flow through a community benefit agreement. We got to have some guardrails in place so the expectations are there. And that when we follow up to tell the story, we know what the community wants to use these funds for and what their goals are. So then they can report to us, and I'd love to talk about, a couple opportunities, one of which, one of our favorites in Salt Lake City, not that we play favorites, but they were one of the first to really jump into this opportunity. There was an energy equity fund at the city of Salt Lake and their sustainability department. They were getting going. They had won a grant, but they needed a couple more sources of revenue to really bring it to the fore. They stuck a lot of their existing programs from micro food grants to indoor air quality filters for residents. A lot of their existing programs they put in this fund so that they could, just continually fund these initiatives. And so that's one of the ways that they've been able to use social recs is they're selling the recs from the Sorensen Multicultural Center. And
Okay.
that nets them around $10,000 a year. It's actually quite small, but clearly mighty in the fact that their programs are now using this revenue to stay doing impact, but also to grow. And that's just a small but very mighty example. And the buyer there is Okta. They're a tech company that has a real
Hmm.
innovative approach to their climate strategy. They, from the inception, wanted to make sure that it wasn't just about carbon reduction, but it was really about serving communities and the communities that they have a workforce and employee base in, like Salt Lake City.
Nice. I love that case study. So, yeah, so what are some of the most surprising partnerships that you've built through Solar Stewards? Like, what are they? What made them work, and how can others learn from them?
Well, that's a really great question because so to be surprised, you think you've seen it all out here.
I know we're being surprised every moment of the day these days. So,
But it really is. We have community partners that they just their leadership in their communities just kind of shows up in the fact that they
mm,
embrace our program.
nice. So
So
the community advocates you have that are there are really the ones that are being the liaison, perhaps, between you and the partnership.
well, we're here for them,
Yeah,
and the thing
yeah.
is, they don't specialize in solar a lot of times. They have a broad range of community things, and to see them to just, you know, jump into our marketplace, navigate it, pretty much effortlessly. We do try to demystify all of the weird things about solar that can sometimes overwhelm folks and be a barrier to their journey. Absolutely. Like, what's the difference between a megawatt and a megawatt hour? And, all of that extra technical stuff. I mean, that's what our marketplace, and our team is really there for. But sometimes they just off to the races. And, there's
Well,
a
you make it
community.
easy for them, I think, to make that happen,
We
right?
try, we try.
Yeah.
At the same time, talk about surprises. Sometimes we have some pretty sophisticated community partners that do work in solar and they need a little more help than we thought. Uh, you
Okay.
never know, you never know. But one thing that I love to see is, the willingness to embrace innovation. Because
Hmm.
sometimes, in community work, we can just get a little too comfortable with, maybe philanthropic initiatives. But sometimes you gotta, like you said, diversify where that funding is coming from as a community partner. And likewise, just as you said, when corporates are thinking about their strategy, to think about, well, we can attract a more, diverse workforce, meaning, skill sets and attention to all of these different, you know, uh, the new workforce nowadays, they care about the integrity of a brand, right? They want to see what you're doing in your
Oh,
corporate
yeah.
social responsibility. So this is one way they're seeing that the value and the money that they're spending in their carbon reduction can do a little bit more, and that's always a thrilling to see.
Yes, totally. Um, I want to jump into the massive data center growth that we're having right now, right? That's all
Yeah.
you read about in the energy world. Seems it's front and center. We're hearing about 1, 2, 3 gigawatts, right, of energy that data centers are using and they're or creating. Enough to power entire cities, as I said. So, what are we not talking about when it comes to like the true costs of these developments and how are they affecting the communities while they're building it and after they leave?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's been, and Solar Stewards were based in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, and the state of Georgia has passed some incentives for data centers to come and set up shop, and they
Okay.
certainly have taken full advantage of that. And so I've been a little awestruck by the scale and speed of
Right.
the development. And I worry about our communities that are now competing with these large industrial applications for the same resources. I mean, those of us that have been in energy for a while, I mean, it was the plateau of load growth. Everyone thought that, we were never going to need as much as we're looking at needing right now. So originally, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to be naive, I thought, well, hey, maybe they'll give DG, as in distributed generation, as in local opportunities, rooftop solar. Maybe they'll stop being so ornery about it since they're going to need
Mhm.
everything they can get. Sadly, I don't know if we're seeing that yet.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it continues to be, a barrier in the fact that I guess if they're not seeing a way to include it in their own capital costs and ways to make money, then they're not seeing it as part of the solution. I mean, at the same time,
When you say
though,
they, are you talking about the corporations that are coming in and doing and creating the center?
I'm talking about the utilities that have now a responsibility to supply these data centers
Yeah.
with their increased load while also making sure that their ratepayers or customers on a residential and a people level are not being unnecessarily burdened.
Okay.
So I would want to see, if we're going to talk about a all of the above strategy, that
Yeah.
DG, be allowed to add to that mix. But at the same time, some entrenched interests still persist, and
Yeah.
people want to block that.
Yeah. I would think that that could also be a pressure you can put on the cities and the mayors. I got privy to a 1.2 gigawatt uh, data center that's happening in Texas.
Mm.
And I sat on I didn't sat, I saw a panel that I've mentioned before, and Caruso was the group that is creating this. And it sounded like a really amazing thing that they're doing, that they brought in the community front and center, right? Hiring people, talking to the mayor, what she said 8 times a day. So I wonder if, like community by community, right? You really need to put the pressure on because that's the time that you do it. Right there,
Absolutely.
because you hold some power at this point, and you can make it so that you use community partners, even in the the generation of solar or what have you. So I just want to say that because they seem like they're doing a great job, but there might be what I'm hearing you say, it's not happening everywhere, right? And
Yeah,
since it's just beginning, I don't say it's just beginning, it's been happening for a bit, but we haven't even seen where it's going. I mean, we're talking 10 megawatts,
that's right.
some of the things that I've heard.
I think that most folks, they understand that these things are big, but they don't have the frame of reference to the size and the amount
Yeah,
of resources that they really are. So, I think exactly to your point, it is a responsibility of a municipality or the authority having jurisdiction to recognize those implications and put up some guardrails and some ways that communities can start to make up for some of those externalities that they're going to
yeah,
eventually end up paying for if they're not careful. So I encourage communities to be just as you are being proactive and having these conversations. And it's not about a cash grab. It's recognizing that we're not in this millennia. Let's work together instead of fostering more
yeah.
exclusion and exploitation. And that's just about fairness. That's recognizing that these resources are coming from our community. And, we want to be compensated. And we have a couple things that we want to do as a community. We can work
Right.
together to make that happen, like local energy. Like more local distributed generation projects powering schools, powering community centers, having, heating and cooling stations, resiliency, this all could work together.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question. You might have already answered it. It was about if you were advising, right, a city that's welcoming a data center, what three equity requirements
Mm,
would you insist be built into the deal?
wow. Well, first off, let's start with a community benefit agreement. And you can call that, you can give it a different name, but it's really just that agreement between the folks developing the data center, or any, heavy infrastructure, any resource intensive project, let's say,
Yeah.
and the priorities of the community. I would start with that vehicle in which
Yes.
to, set those terms for both sides. And I would make it, I guess this is the second thing, is I would make it not just a short term negotiation in the beginning, where it could be misconstrued as kind of a pay to play, but more of a long term relationship where there's some accountability and some, checks and balances with, the expectations of not just, hey, we want to, let's pick a hypothetical, we want to put a park here, but, to monitor and track and report on how that's actually going. Uh,
Yes.
and third, because obviously we focus on climate and renewables, I would love to see more local procurement of the renewable energy that can help. Of course, I don't see a 100% offset by any means, from just a numbers standpoint, but at least can help to bolster the grid health of that community and try to make up for some of the load that data center is going to be using from that community. Keep those rates low for
Mm.
the municipality, and that can be done in a number of ways. It does not have to be complicated.
Yeah, I'd like to see it also, those rates low for even the investor-owned utility, not just municipalities. I mean, because there are more of them than there are, right, in the municipality world. So what role do you think that social enterprises like yours can play in creating not just access, but what about ownership? What
Ooh,
about the community having skin in the game, right? And
yes.
part an owner. This is one of my dreams to see more of that. We're seeing it in other markets. I see it in agriculture happening. Um, but what if they had ownership and that would help those historically excluded communities? What do you think about
Yes.
that?
Well, one thing that has always uh, I really resonated with, and this gets back to the economic opportunities of renewable energy particularly solar and distributed generation, is the opportunity to own those assets. I mean, does it get more module as far as application in energy than a solar panel? I don't know, and a
Yeah, that's
microinverter.
good.
So, it can scale up, it can scale down, and it's just, a lot of little drops fill a big bucket. That's what we're talking about here. So the ownership in utilizing solar is just vast, particularly those behind the meter or, self-sited opportunities that distributed generation is really defined by. So having that ownership, but to your point about how else, community solar, if there's a co-op model, can be very powerful. And of
Hmm.
course, when we're talking about RECs, the folks that own the asset itself get the first dibs of the RECs. So,
Right.
that's and those, as we are an example of, can be monetized to do a lot of things. One thing about economic inclusion is you can't save your way into another bracket. There got to have another form of revenue
Yeah.
somewhere. So,
Well
there's
said.
a solar panel can do a lot more than just save you a couple cents every kilowatt hour. And that's what we're here to do. But that does start with ownership. You're absolutely right. And, when you can control your own energy and your own energy costs, that puts you in quite a different position, as a community.
Yeah. And I think that whole gold rush idea that I'm hearing, like coming in, getting that gold and leaving. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, we'll have some of our workers stay behind and run the thing. But having ownership in that would really obliterate that. It would be say, hey, we're in this with you, right? And
Yeah.
we're here, we're partners with you. I just I know that always that's not something utilities want to hear, but I think in the new what we're seeing with this big wave of happening and hopefully different ways to for our energy transition to work, we start opening our minds and hearts to different ways of creating energy for all, right? And this is one that I'm not going to stop talking about. So
That's right.
so I hope it doesn't have to be everything, but it has to be part of it. So that's true community engagement, right?
Yes.
Uh, let's talk policy a little bit, right? So what kind of policy mandates or guardrails, as you say, do we need to make equity like non-negotiable in our clean energy transition?
Mhm. Well, I did briefly mention just a mandate for the local, opportunity. Sometimes when we see climate action, particularly in rec markets, it's more of a generic national purchase and it's not localized. And I just really want to see more application and understanding of what could be possible. So that's something, carrots and sticks, they both are can work in different scenarios, but I think to require as a mandate a certain percentage of localized purchase or generation makes a lot of sense. Here, we've got a great frame of reference with LEED certification or USGBC. Folks are familiar with the built environment and the
Yes.
amazing, shift in the way the more sustainable stock that we're now building with, thanks to the framework of the LEED standards.
Hmm.
Um, and leadership in energy and design, I believe, is what LEED stands for. Just for folks that maybe aren't familiar. But in that framework, they require you to source, your construction projects. You can go for a couple credits if you can source, 20% within this radius, 60% within this
Mm.
radius. I mean, we can absolutely do that when we talk about the application of distributed generation solar. So that's just, one way that it can be done. I would love to see LEED standards for data centers. I've been poking around saying, hey, you guys,
Why not?
yeah.
Right?
I mean, you have the framework, you have the opportunity. So, we definitely need some type of quality control and standards around these developments. I don't know I think they're building just the fastest they can do. And
Right. And
sometimes I
that's, we've
sloppy.
gotten, a green light in this administration for that right now. So, I mean, I'm for innovation always, but it has to be responsible and it has
Yes.
to have equity built in. And it, like I said at the beginning, it can have an economic benefit for all.
Yes.
So, right?
Yes. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the equity conversation because, people mistakenly think, well, that's going to be somebody else's problem. But I think, as we sit here in 2025, it's becoming even more evident that we are in this together. And, if we don't work together, then we're suffering together.
Yeah.
So, it's just a matter of time before it affects us all. And if there's no, what more timely example than climate change do we have that's pretty visible with that, but I think
Totally.
it definitely starts with working together on local levels to make sure those externalities are included. Those additional
Yeah.
costs are not pushed over for someone else to bear.
Right.
That's just not fair, and it's an antiquated way of doing business and thinking, and we have so many tools to do better in that regard.
We do have so many tools and people like you to make it happen. So,
We're one. We've tried. We're out here.
yes, right on. So, want to do a little brainstorming on this one because if we stop treating equity, right, as a charity and
Right.
instead treat it as a smart market design and even a growth strategy for utilities and corporations, what would be the business case? What would you put in that business case for that? And how might that shift what's possible in the transition so we don't repeat what we've done in the past? That's what we don't want to happen. And now that speed is on the table, it's like, oh, we have to do that tomorrow, right? With data centers and frankly, climate change too, right? Or race to zero. So, what do you think, like, might be in that business case for utilities and corporations?
Well, yeah, I'm going to talk about just the economics of it all, and I really appreciate that question because it does get a little deep in it. It's going to take a complete reframing of how we
Yeah.
see businesses. I think, back when small businesses, mid-sized businesses were, and they still are, but, we need to support them more, a cornerstone of this country specifically, but even globally. There was more of a succession planning. You had a business and you thought you were going to pass it to your daughters and sons. And so there was definitely a focus on the sustainability, meaning, the quality of the service or product that you delivered. And you could build that over generations. And I think that's what was just so exciting about some of these legacy companies. Unfortunately, we've just shifted now to more of that short-term earnings
Yeah.
type of focus, which I think is just eroding all the value. And, now we even see that with private equity coming in and basically, you know, uh, as a leech, just kind of sucking all the assets and goodness out of an enterprise and then, basically dumping it to, in a bankruptcy court. And so that's the type of thinking around business that we have to, in some way, shape, or form, move away from because what it's really doing is, setting us up for a lot of losses. And we got to get past a zero sum game where the only way I
Yeah.
can win is by, you losing. And we know that's not true. I like to think about, how
Mm.
indigenous communities have been doing this forever and thinking of 7 generations into the
Yes.
future. We don't, this isn't novel. This way of thinking for generations just has been around, and there's opportunities for us to embrace, their leadership and guidance and wisdom in this regard and apply it to these new systems. Even folks like Milton Friedman, who had his profit doctrine and really just went around, evangelizing this way of thinking,
Yeah.
have kind of reflected and thought, I might have been missing something somewhere.
Yeah. Well, we're living that right now, aren't we?
We are, and there's definitely room for someone to, rethink some frameworks. But, if we're going to laud these people as, the the experts. Well, why don't we listen to them in their, sunsetting days and make a pivot here? So perhaps there's a way to incentivize more long-term growth in businesses. I think consumers have a real role to play. Sustainability is, so vast. It's not just the energy that we focus on at Solar Stewards, but also the right to fix. The fact that capitalism has a so short term that we're
Mm,
creating goods that need to be completely replaced so someone can sell us a complete new one. What a waste.
yeah.
What a waste of resources. So speaking of, regulations, I think we need some right to fix, right to repair. I like the
Yeah, I
alliteration.
like that,
in
right?
that.
We're so used to like the throwaway society, right?
Yeah, and I know we don't feel
With these
comfortable with it.
things, right? We're always upgrading
Right,
our phones
right.
and so forth. Yeah.
That's right. And to make sure that we're building for longevity. So, back to just the externalities of that is, where I'm getting at is in the business case, in the business model, we've got to, recognize that that's all part of the cost, but also the benefit. So it is a much larger frame of thinking than maybe, in a renewable energy credit market, but it
Yeah.
also is starting to hint at we need more local engagement. So stay
Mm.
tuned. I would love to, in an entrepreneurial career, have more social enterprises on some of these other facets that all feed together.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to add a couple of things to that. One is that for a utility or when you're doing projects that are community benefited, it's cheaper. The cash is cheaper to do it, right? There are green bonds, there are ESG funds, and that costs less capital that we would for another kind of project. So there's a benefit from a financial standpoint there. There's certainly a regulatory benefit. Smoother processes happen, less community pushback. You know that a community person or two I've worked with in the environmental communities could take it down. But what if you were working together ahead of time, right? Then it changes the game. For in New Mexico, when we were trying to pass the EPA, the ETA, which is the Energy Transition Act, which said, hey, by 2030, 2040, we'll be completely emissions free. It took everybody to do that. And the governor, yay, Governor Michelle Lujan, made the two parties go together and said, "You're not coming out of here until you figure this out."
Yes.
So it was, and it happened, right? It was like, we have to do it. So there are so many ways to make it happen. And look, that was historic legislation. That's for everyone. So I want to go 10 years out, Dana, right? It's 2035. All right. What would a truly equitable clean energy market look like to you?
Well, that's a beautiful thought to think about, that vision. And that's actually not that far away.
I know. When you're
I,
talking in energy, it's like, oh, wow. Yeah, because
that's
there's so much
right.
planning, right?
Hmm. Well, I mean, from just where we sit, we would love to see, again, just uh, prevailing attitude that we got to think about our local community before we think of anything else. And I'm so glad that you brought up how beneficial community benefit agreements and community engagement can be to getting these things sited and built
Yeah.
so much faster, and with a lot of less drama, keep real. But that vision is just more of that local economy. Let's engage those small businesses. Let's create those, local jobs and the training. I always focus in on the economic opportunities. But then, I'd love to hear a scientist say that we're making, a little bit of a dent in the
Yes.
warming. I don't, this whole notion of past the point of no return, I don't know how to process that.
Yeah.
But one thing I do want to see in 10 years is a climate mitigation strategy for community
I love
because
that.
we know it's changing, and for better or for worse, we are an adaptable, human race.
Yeah.
So I want to see resiliency centers. I want us to not be caught by
Resiliency center.
surprise.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think planning for a disaster is not exactly fun work. I don't know. Maybe someone finds it fun because there's, strategy involved and you are saving lives. You're staring at a scenario dead in the face. That is quite scary. That's what I mean by not fun. But if the readiness was there in 10 years, that's maybe my pragmatic answer to
Mm.
that question. I will feel, and the resources for that as well.
Yeah, right. Right on. So, in closing, you've spent years really in this space where progress can be slow sometimes and politically fraught. What sustains you personally, Dana, through the inevitable setbacks? And I'm sure you can have stories on all those setbacks. What sustains you? And how can you share that with some of maybe our listeners who are like really interested, right? And they might be in the middle of that right now.
Well, I appreciate the focus on that, and I think one, always taking time to talk with multi generations, and particularly
Mm,
some of our newer climate activists and youth. Maybe they're approaching it from a career standpoint or maybe an advocacy standpoint, but making time to talk to them in a very authentic fashion about, my personal journey, because man, I can't do this forever. I want to take a rest. So we got
I
to
know.
talk about a succession plan, right? But their energy, their enthusiasm, their humor, it'll cheer you up. So just, it's definitely not something where it's one-sided, like I'm doing them a favor. It just
Right. We need
recharges my
everybody here.
battery.
Right.
So that would be one definite way. And then using humor, I saw that I think it was the special on streaming. Then I won't name the streaming platform unless they want to sponsor your show. Where Shaq was talking about he did his PhD dissertation, I believe, on humor in business. And I love a good laugh. I love a corny joke. So every once in a while, I feel like talk about the business culture. We've been kind of programmed to have to be so serious all the time.
Yes.
Um,
Especially in climate change, right?
Especially
It's
in
like,
climate because it is kind of scary. So if there's an opportunity to just bring a little levity in there,
hmm
I think that's one way, and you could call it a coping mechanism as well. Dark humor.
yes, we need that, right? Sometimes to lighten the load.
That's right.
So thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for joining
This was
me
so
and
fun.
your wisdom on our show today. Uh, so everyone, if you enjoyed the show, please really share it. First of all, we'd love to hear from you. Make comments for us, and I'm going to give you a prompt for that. But also share it. Who should you be sending this to? You might know someone. Could be your senator. It could be your local community advocacy groups. It could be your utility, right? So who is it, right? So share it because there were a lot of great ideas on how to progress forward in our energy transition. And what I want to know from you is what do you think? Please put it in the comments. What do you think communities should be asking for, right? As we progress with more AI and more data centers, what should be built into that agreement, right? I know I asked Dana 3 things that should be built in. What are yours? I'd love to know. So please put it in the comments, okay? This is your chance to be heard, and I read every one of them. Because, as you know, I say this in every show, it takes all of us to do this together, right? Where we leave no one behind. Because we are all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.